Okay, okay, I just put this on the screen for now because I wanted to sort of alert you to what's coming up and the preparations that we will be starting today for not just only the in-class test and discussing the review and so forth, but also I want to discuss the group work and presentation and the text that you will be analyzing and so forth. So try to cover some of the practical aspects of the course in terms of the assessment and the work that you'll be doing. So let's get underway. First of all, to remind you that in weeks 10 through 12, I expect it shouldn't be 3 weeks, but most likely 2 weeks, 10 and 11, but just week 12 in case. And this will be when you will be doing the group work presentations. And this will involve the analysis of a text, and I will be telling you today what the text will be. This counts 20%. This is the group work. I'll explain in a moment more about the analysis, and followed by an individual commentary. Will be an individual based piece of writing that each of you will do that will be based on what you learned more or less from the analysis and the group work that you did, and commenting on the analysis and the text. You are already organized into groups of 5, and we have 10 groups, only one group, because there's 49 students, so one group has 4. The rest of you are all assigned to groups of 5. And you can check this on Canvas. I believe some of you, a majority of you more or less did this yourselves. So I hope that you should be happy with your group mates, and some of you, however, did not do it, and so the PhD student from the department who's assisting me with this, Ms. Chi, has assisted me with those assigning to groups anyone who was sort of not yet assigned. All right, so that should be done. Now, I do want you to remember, in week 6, I gave you a particular file, and this will be quite important for you. It's an Excel file, and it's to enable you to enter your grammatical analysis. So you should check that out. You should get that and have it. You will be, as a group, presenting one sort of Excel file with your analysis, besides what you will be discussing about your presentation. And this will be, you can find it in week 6, okay? Now, just to come back again, so the 20% is your presentation, and 20% is the individual commentary. Now, what about the group presentation? Now, this will be due. In other words, what you'll be doing is you'll be preparing a PowerPoint, and with the Excel file completed, and this will be due by noon on the 2nd of November. That'll be week 10. Your presentation will be 20 minutes. Now, we will schedule these presentations later. For now, though, everyone must submit on week 10, all right? So it doesn't matter if you're scheduled for week 11, you still need to submit, and what will count will be what you submit on the 2nd of November. So please remember that. When you are scheduled does not matter. And this is important because I don't want some of you to have been sort of allowed an extra week. That wouldn't be fair to those that were doing it in week 10. So everyone must submit in week 10. And what your analysis will involve is taking a text, being able to assign it into what are the clauses that make up the text, looking at the transitivity structure, identifying the process type, participants, who's in the ER role, who's in the ED role, the circumstance. For logical structure, whether it's a simple clause or it's a complex clause. And if it's complex, then is there a parataxis or is there hypotaxis? Now this at the level of the clause. You have clauses that combine into a complex clause, right? And what we would punctuate as a sentence. There's another level of logical structure. However, this is the rhetorical structure. This is the structure that is above clause level. And this is another aspect to it, and we've discussed the rhetorical structure. For also analysis into mood, is it made up of declaratives, interrogatives, imperatives? Modality, what is the author's use of modality, modal auxiliaries? Theme structure, what is the theme of the clauses? What is the thematic progression? All right, these are the aspects then to be analyzing. And in terms of transitivity, in terms of logical structure at the level of the clause and theme, these will be entered into the Excel file. But then you will be preparing a presentation, and that presentation will be looking at what sort of general statements you can make then about this text and the nature of the text based on your findings from your analysis. Now, the individual commentary is not simply to repeat what you have done as far as a group. In other words, it's not just simply to repeat the findings that were part of your group presentation. Instead, you are to discuss, and now here I'm telling you, what you are going to get as a text to analyze is an abstract, a journal abstract. You go to a journal, you find at the beginning of the journal paper, there is an abstract. Well, I'm taking 10 abstracts. These abstracts are all from the journal for which I'm the editor, Linguistics in the Human Sciences. And I'm taking that as the text that you'll be analyzing. And what you'll be looking at then and saying in your individual commentary is it a good abstract? You're going to evaluate it. In the group presentation, you're more or less describing. You're getting your data, you're looking for patterns that identify the nature of the text. But in the individual commentary, you're discussing and you're evaluating, is that a good abstract? How well does it fit with the expectations for what one should find in an abstract? Now, this individual commentary will be due in week 13, 23rd of November. It's not very long, just 700 words. So the individual commentary is due in week 13, 700 words. That's the 23rd of November. All right, now weeks 10 through 12, or weeks 10 and 11, PowerPoint presentations. And what I want you to do is I want you to prepare a PowerPoint, and into each slide, insert an audio, which is a recording which you will make as a group. In other words, some of you will do some slides and some of you will do other slides. And what you'll be doing is entering then inserting the audio into each slide so that when it plays, we hear what you would be saying that goes with each of those slides. Now, as I said, the scheduling will be arranged later. The class on week 10, for example, if your group was scheduled on week 10, the class would be invited to view your PowerPoint, and we would have a slot during the class time, 20 minutes, for the class to be looking at your presentation. In other words, you will be submitting the PowerPoints to me, and the PowerPoints then will be uploaded and then made available to the class to be able to view. All right, so the last 10 minutes of it, it'll be 30 minutes for each group. Last 10 minutes will be allocated for question and answer. Now, important point. All group members are required to be online in the Zoom meeting and available to answer questions. In other words, when you're during that question and answer time, definitely I will be asking questions and I will be identifying who in the group I will ask that question to based on what I've seen in terms of the slides. And if I have a question about a certain slide and who was presenting, then I would be addressing that question to that person. So all the group members, you need to be online in the Zoom meeting. I would hope most of you are already, but definitely you need to be there when it is your group's time to present, all right? And I will be asking, I will go through the list of names that are there and I will ask and make sure that you're there and available and online and able to if questions are asked, be able to answer them, okay? Now, something in Canvas, if you've not yet looked at Canvas, and by the way, I do hope you all look at the announcements that I send out. Sometimes when I get certain queries, I sort of seem to notice that the person hasn't been reading the announcements. So I do hope you do, because it's important. That aside, what I want you to notice here is in week 7. Please look at the folder for week 7. It says review. And what you'll notice is that there are subfolders. One says abstracts and the other says mock midterm files. I hope you've already noticed this. And the mock midterm files, I hope you've already taken a look at if you haven't already downloaded and printed out maybe, which might have been a good idea to do and take a look at it. The abstracts folder is, it contains the abstracts for the analysis. And the abstracts are numbered 1 through 10. So if you are group 1, you're doing abstract 1. Group 2, abstract 2, and so forth. All right, so there are 10 abstracts. As I mentioned, they all come from, they are all have been for published articles. In fact, one of those papers is Halliday's journal paper. All of these journal papers appeared in the journal for which I'm the editor, Linguistics and the Human Sciences. And these abstracts, I want you still though to evaluate it in terms of then whether it fits the expectations for what an abstract should be like. Now you could be saying to me, what's an abstract to be like though? What can I do to find this out here? The Linguistic Society of America gives some information about what they consider to be model abstracts. They give a number of examples. They give 9 examples, in fact, and one of those is considered an unacceptable abstract, all right? But most of them are considered to be model abstracts. And this, you see the link here. You can go there. I suggest you do so. Look at the descriptions that are given for each of these abstracts that are there that talk about it, describe it, and so it would be useful, especially when it comes to evaluating, as you will do for your individual commentary. All right, so go to linguisticsociety.org and you will find at this link this page that you see on your screen here. Now there's another link that I'd like to give you. It's also about abstracts. It also gives some abstracts. These, though, it tells you to guess which are accepted or rejected. They give several examples of abstracts and so forth as well. And so these are some of the resources that I'm suggesting to you. Now, by the way, I just make a point. If you do go to this particular web page, you do see on the 3rd bullet point a link. Now that link doesn't work, all right? Instead, it is the same, what they're showing you is the same page that I just showed you on the previous page. And I'm illustrating also with, in a smaller box here. That is the same page that's linguisticsociety.org, that page, all right? So don't bother with that link that you see in this page. Instead, use the link that I provided to you, all right? Now, there's another suggestion for you, and this is quite new. This is a webinar on abstract writing, how to convince in a page. I strongly suggest you take a look at this. Again, this is from linguisticsociety.org, and I think this will be especially useful when it comes to your individual commentary. I'm asking you to evaluate. So what are the sort of features that one expects to find in an abstract? What should one not do in an abstract? And this is what I will want you to be discussing in your individual commentary. So these resources I'm giving to you, and I'm asking you to go on your own initiative to look them up, to go through and read up about it, to go through this webinar on abstract writing, and use this information. So there's a bit of on your own research that I'm expecting you to carry out here with respect to abstracts and abstract writing. Now, when you do your analysis, remember you have the following steps that you need to carry out. Now, what I suggest, and this is why I said you'll have a team of people working, right? And in your team of 5 people, you sort of allocate certain of these steps to someone, and they carry out the analysis, and then they contribute that part to the presentation. So somebody in your group needs to do the clause analysis, breaking it down into clauses. Someone needs to do the transitivity analysis. Now, you may decide you want more than one person working on this. That is for you as a team to sort of allocate and designate who's going to be responsible. Step 3, the logical analysis, clause level. This is what you'll enter into that Excel spreadsheet, whether it's paratactic or hypotactic. Above clause level, this is rhetorical structure theory analysis. Mood analysis. Now, this is going to be relatively, what should I say? It's very straightforward. I doubt you're going to find many questions and imperatives in an abstract. Modality. Yes, you should find some use of modality, and that'll be related to the use of modality in academic discourse. And finally, theme analysis. Again, this will be something that you'd enter into your spreadsheet. All right, so these are the steps into which you will be doing your analysis of that text that you have. The abstracts are not long. They're relatively short, I would consider, but still there will be enough for you to be doing, and I make it not so long because I want you to have time to be able to really do a good analysis. Now, I showed you this before, and this is, I put in, where is the Excel file? It's in week 6, all right? Grammatical analysis template 1, all right? So please go get that and decide who in your team. You now have the text. You can look it up. Depending on your group number, you have whichever abstract. You can begin to sort of delegate responsibility for who will do this and that, and you can start to get to work. Now, what I'm looking at, and this is what you'd sort of see from your Excel spreadsheet. All right, this would be what is this? This is the transitivity analysis, right? Process type, the participant, who's in the ER role, who's in the ED role, circumstances. Now this will, again, you will first have to have somebody do the clause analysis so that you're all of you who are doing various aspects of the analysis are on the same page as far as what the clauses are. So whoever is going to be doing the clause analysis, that's the beginning. And then from there, you can be looking at the various aspects, right? Just as I did when I did this analysis. Theme analysis will likewise be from the spreadsheet. Textual, interpersonal, topical. I can't remember if on the Excel sheet there should be displaced theme, all right, as well. And I hope you remember what is displaced theme. It is when you have, for example, take a look here, 5A. What was theme? On July 14th, 1996. This was the circumstance. But usually by default, what comes first in a clause? It's usually, in English, it's the grammatical subject. But here you put the circumstance first. That is a choice that you have made. It's an important choice for this text because it would provide it sort of the framework, this narrative framework that you're going to be, that the speaker was using on July 14th, and then in sentence 11 on March 23rd. So this sort of gave the listener an awareness of how the text was progressing. Chronologically, it was a narrative, it was a story. But the subject was displaced. Finally, logical. This is the clause level logical analysis. And here you're identifying what is simple, what is a complex clause that involves whether parataxis or hypotaxis. We did do an analysis, if you remember, of an abstract before. I remember this one that was phonology, and we looked at it, we analyzed it in terms of the clauses that make it up. We identify the processes and so forth. So we have done an analysis before of an abstract, and this was the example of that. All right, that's sort of the where we're at as far as what your group work and individual commentary will involve. I hope that's clear. What I'd like to do is I'd like to take, because I can't very well see the chat, I'd like to just sort of open up the chat for a moment and see if there's any questions here that should be addressed. All right, so can we change the PowerPoint in minor ways after submitting and before presenting? I'd like to say I'd prefer not, because again, it won't be very fair if those of you who are presenting in week 11 have had more time. You've then looked at the presentations in week 10 and looked at it and said, wow, I wish we had done it that way. That wouldn't be really fair. I really plan on what you submit to me on week 10. That's it. That's the final version. All right, that's the final version. Where can we find these links, in which folder? I've shown you one of the questions, the links, the abstracts, and are there on the week 7. In week 7, there's a subfolder called abstracts. All right, please look that up. As I've mentioned, as I've pictured and shown you, the Excel file is in week 6 because I was using it by way of example at that time, and I'm going to leave it there. You've been informed where it is, and you can get that. And then the other ones, the abstracts, are in the abstracts folder under week 7. So before I go on to start looking at midterm review, are there any other questions that anyone has? Just a moment. Let me have a chance to get some water, please. So I think that it should be, hopefully it's clear. And I think that it's really, honestly, I don't think it's a very difficult kind of analysis that you're doing. I think if I gave you all an example of poetry and asked you to analyze it, that might be more difficult. Abstracts are rather straightforward, and I do ask you to show the initiative. This is really what I will be looking for in terms of assessing you, is to the extent that you actually did some research using the web links that I've given you, the webinar from linguisticsociety.org and so forth. The model abstract, the question again comes back, and please go to the link that I've shown you of, let me just go back to, because again, I had another question, and the question is about where can you find the links for the model abstracts, and that's what you see. That's what you can see here, all right? It's right here at the top, linguisticsociety.org. And this will give you a discussion, because they take these several examples, the 9 examples, and they talk about each of the abstracts, what was done in the abstract, what's good about the abstract, and so forth. And then the other page that question, I can find these abstracts for group presentation. What about the links for the model abstract? That's on this page here. Linguistic Society 1, because the folder only contained 1 file. Okay, Linguistic Society is the link that you see here, all right? I hope I'm not mistaken. I hope that I've done it correctly in the sense that, let me just, can someone just check, if you wouldn't mind? I think I've put them there. I want to make sure I did so. Week 7, the abstracts folder, do you find one document should be with 10 abstracts? Can someone just check? Okay, yeah, okay, it's there. All right, so you look at that and you see which abstract that you have. That's all, I hope, straightforward. And follow these links, all right? You have the one that I just shown you here, this one, linguisticsociety.org, model abstracts. This one, again, as I mentioned, the link on that page there doesn't work, but it's the same web page that I just showed you, and from linguisticsociety.org. And the other thing that I also like you to pay attention to, and that is something fairly new. This is the webinar. So what will impress me when I look at your individual commentaries will be whether you actually listened to the webinar, whether you actually looked at the description of the abstracts and from the linguisticsociety.org, or even went outside of what I'm suggesting to you here and found some additional resources about abstracts and abstract writing, and whether or not the abstract that your group analyzed sort of fit with those expectations. Okay, that's basically what I'll be looking for. All right, so if we're good, then I'm going to close the chat window here, and I'm going to, let's see, just a moment. Let's get back down to the midterm review. All right. Normally, if it was if we were meeting here in this, you were here in this lecture theater, I'd probably be giving you a midterm, an actual paper is a midterm mock, sort of what you would expect. But it's a bit different, and you're doing it online and so forth. So I did put this all in the PowerPoint, so you've probably seen everything that I'm going to be presenting here. So a bit different. Normally, I would have you be going through this yourselves as sort of a practice run. Well, in this instance, we're going to go through it together, all right? So this is the midterm review. Midterm will be similar to what you'd find on the exam, all right? What I'm expecting you to cover, though, in certain aspects will be limited by what we've covered in the first weeks. There are 2 sections to the midterm. You will, and here will be the instructions, see the attached data tables for transitivity, logical, and theme ream analyses from the systemic functional analysis of the text below, which is taken from a sample of a student's writing for a university course. Okay, so this sort of gives you some idea what the nature of the text is like. I have a question here. How has fit to context likely influenced the patterning you observe in the text? Comment on how patterning of choices in terms of lexicogrammatical features contributes to the cohesiveness and coherence of this text. If you disagree with a particular point in the analysis, you may note this in your comments. Again, I mentioned this at the very outset of the course. When I give you a test, I don't expect you to do the analysis. I expect you to do the analysis when you have time to work and work as a team and get feedback from each other on the nature of the analysis you're doing. That's when I expect you to do the analysis. But when it comes to a test, midterm and the final as well, I give you the analysis. I give you the analysis, and I give you the information that you'd find like in an abstract, all right? So what you are doing is not doing the analysis. For part A of the midterm, you're not doing the analysis part. You've got the data. And this, to me, this is such an important part of the course, and that it's not just about how to analyze. Because all that means is the analysis gives you data. Where the real sort of, what should I say, insight comes from. The real intelligence is how you can make observations based on that data. Yes, I want you to know how to get the data, how to analyze for it, and you're going to do that with your analysis as a group, and then your discussion as on the individual commentary. But here, you're going to have the text. Now, the first thing you do when you start to answer this question, frame the text within the context of situation. By now, you realize that a text, the nature of the text depends very much on the situation in which it is written, or the topic that's going to be talked about, or who you're communicating with. We call that field, tenor, mode. What's the topic? Who are you communicating with? Tenor. Mode. Is it spoken? Is it written? So what are the expectations? What are your expectations given the typical features of text occurring in that context of situation? Occurring in that context of situation. Next thing is you're going to take a look at transitivity. Now, go back to how do you know, you might say, how do I know the nature of this context of situation? All I have is the text. Well, here I explained to you, right? It's a sample of a student's writing for a university course. This is what you would be writing. That's the mode. It's a university course, so it's academic topic. And it is a student's writing a paper, give information. So that is the context. So when you analyze this, you're looking at it already with an expectation. You already have in your way a hypothesis, given the nature of the context of situation. What should I expect to find if it is written as opposed to being spoken? Remember the discussion about Trump and that he speaks in what some say he only can speak in with parataxis. He doesn't know how to use hypotaxis. We saw that's not true. It depends on the context in which he was speaking. When he is just speaking, it was highly paratactic. Gave you the illustration of Nixon, if you remember. So when the discussion of mode is written work, so what would you be expecting to find in written language? If it is in spontaneous spoken, then you would expect more parataxis. You expect now more hypotaxis. You expect probably greater nominalization. What kinds of things, what are your expectations? You should have expectations. You should have sort of a hypothesis about what you're looking at. It's not like you look at a text and, oh, wow, what is this? You have an expectation to begin with. Okay, so frame the context, frame the text within the context of situation. That's how you should begin to answer this question. Then go on to transitivity. You'll have in front of you, you'll have the analysis in terms of process, participant, circumstance. Process in terms of process types, material, mental, verbal, relational, behavioral, existential. Participants, who or what is in the ER role. All right, so I hope that what you're not looking at necessarily on the screen. If you're looking at it on a computer screen, you probably can see it all right. I did upload these as hard copy, so you could print them out. Maybe you've done that. In any way, I hope you're looking at this screen now, and this would be an example of what I would give you on the test. All right. In other words, this is and I also uploaded to you the actual text. All right. And so that is something I haven't shown you that here. That is what I uploaded to you. It went under week 7 in terms of the review. So, but here we're taking a look at transitivity. Now you'll notice it's a bit different than what I have done for example, for that Brandon Leak analysis. I added a column tense. Well, you may have a column added on the test. I'm not guaranteeing you what will be included. I didn't include here the ER and the ED role. Do you need to fill it in? I'm not telling you to do that. No, I'm telling you to analyze it on the basis of what you are given. All right? That's it. You don't have to start, oh, he didn't analyze the ER role, ED role. Do I have to fill that in? No, you don't. All right? If it's not there, it's not there. In terms of the ED role, you'll notice that a number of these are passive. Now, those is what I indicated in red here. There are a number of passive voice, all right? Now, that's sort of typical of academic writing. That's true. But do you get the point I'm making? You analyze and discuss on the basis of the data that's given to you. And it may be different. It may be different in some respects than what you're going to be entering into your grammatical analysis, your Excel file for your abstract analysis, okay? It may be different. So analyze on the basis of the data that you see here. Well, okay, I take a look. What am I noticing? Do I notice anything at this stage? One thing I might do is I might sort of make up a table to sort of give me some idea of the number of material processes, relational processes. All right, and that's what I've done here. Material processes, I've analyzed 32, 71%. So most of it's material. Most of it is a doing kind of process. less so mental, less so verbal, relational also figures in here. Another thing is location. Do I see something with respect to, now you'll notice that the relational processes all seem to cluster between 2 through 5. Are, is, has. So we don't notice it outside of this sort of box, right? It's sort of within this particular cluster here, within these, within clauses 2 through 5. Now, that would, what I'd be doing is I'd be going back. First, I should have said this at the beginning. When you get the midterm test, read the text. Read the text, okay? Don't just look at the data. You got to read the text to begin with. So read it first. Discuss how it fits into the context. What is the nature of the context? Frame your discussion in terms of how that text fits into the context of situation. Then start looking at your data. And one of the questions I'd be having here is, how come? What's being discussed in clauses 2 through 5? I noticed something else, though. Because I did have data here for tense, I noticed that you have one block, which is the relational processes, and then that is largely up to clause, let's see, 5, right? Up to 5. This was sort of, these should be sort of, the numberings are, if you can see paragraphs, it's broken up into paragraphs and then clauses. And I should be more careful. The processes, the relational processes, fall between 2 through 5 paragraphs, all right? Not the clauses. The clauses are on the side here, and that would be clauses 3 through 8. But around clause 7, all right, sentence 7, and that would be just at the end of paragraph 4, we notice a switch to past tense. Why the discussion? Why? What shifted in terms of past tense? You're looking for patterns, and some ways want to explain what those patterns are about. All right, so we notice 2 patterns. One thing is, we notice that paragraphs 2 through leading up into just toward the beginning of paragraph 5, relational processes. I'd go back, I'd look at the text to see what there is about that. I noticed that around that same area, and this is toward the end of paragraph 4, it shifts suddenly to past tense. Okay, that's what I've noticed from the transitivity table. It's suggestive to me of certain things that I should be probably trying to take a look for in the text itself. Logical. Simple versus complex. Parataxis versus hypotaxis. Now, as I said, going into this, my sort of hypothesis was this text should be more hypotactic than paratactic because it's written. Well, what do we notice? Okay. What I noticed, and I was looking here, and you could say, well, why am I looking at the theme table? The theme table is looking at it primarily in terms of finite clauses, not embedded clauses. What I noticed here from the theme table, very obviously, was where these were what we could call simple clauses, where there's I'm looking at basically in terms of the clauses, and I'm looking at it in terms of the theme. I'm looking at just those clauses which are basically finite clauses. Remember, theme, we don't look at non-finite clauses, right? If it's an ing clause or if it's a past participle clause, we don't look at theme. So we look at theme only at finite clauses. Well, that'll be helpful in terms of answering this question. How many simple versus complex? I look at this. What I notice is that I have 1, 2, in fact, I counted them, and I found that I have 2 simple clauses, no embedding. I have 3 simple clauses plus embedding. And I have 12 complex clauses. All right, so not many simple clauses, and more, in fact, simple clauses with embedding due to rank shifting and nominalization. I have 12 complex clauses. So let me shift then to look at the logical table. I've already answered in terms of how many simple, how many complex. And in fact, the theme table was more probably useful to me for that purpose, as I showed you here, to look at the idea simple versus complex. Leaving off the non-finite clauses, all right? Looking only at the finite clauses. So I take a look here, and I notice I have, if I have a non-finite clause, it definitely would be part of a complex clause, all right? So I have here a 2A, 4A, as I mentioned to you, counting it. What's embedding? Well, you see, that's the one here, 2A, B is the embedded clause, 4A, B is an embedded clause, and so forth. 7 would be simple without embedding. All right, so then let's take a look at the logical table. Anything that I can notice here? Looking at it, let me see. What do I notice? Counting just in terms, and I drew a line down the middle. So the left-hand side is what? Left-hand side is paratactic. Right-hand side is hypotactic. Remember, when you have paratactic, you have sort of a sequence, 1, 2. When it's elaboration, that's alpha and a beta clause. The alpha is the main clause, the beta is the dependent clause. Now you'll notice how I count it. I'm counting relations, paratactic relations. And that we see in 5, A, B, and C. There's an extension there. And 7, A with B and C. All right, so there's 2 paratactic relations. 6 is another. Now, going then off to the right-hand side, I have only 3 paratactic relationships. I go down the list and I count them. I'm counting the pairs, all right? And I find I have 9 sets of elaboration. 6 sets related to enhancement. 83% of it is hypotactic. 17% is paratactic. Now, here would be a good point to discuss with reference to what was discussed in lecture. You refer back to the lecture where we talked about paratactic, hypotactic in spoken versus written discourse. We talked about it with reference to Trump and illustrated his use of language with respect to others like Nixon and Obama, and the analysis there, we were able to say something about the difference between our expectations of conversational style, spontaneous, without it having been prepared, as opposed to something which was scripted and read. All right, so in breaking it down then, I just again make up a table. Yes, it's useful to make up a table and to illustrate what kinds of relations we notice, how much extension, how much enhancement, how much elaboration, how much, and so forth. Okay, now come back though. Notice, where does the parataxis occur? Where does the parataxis occur? Between paragraphs 5, at the beginning of paragraph 7. Haven't we noticed something about that section of the text before? Haven't we noticed something already with respect to this section? And interestingly, it's highly paratactic just at this point. So go back and look and compare across the tables and across what we noticed. We notice that what happens is that it also shifts to past tense. So I ask you to go back and take a look at the text. What happens? Something happens between paragraphs 5 through 7. Theme. I notice some presence of interpersonal theme, in fact, perhaps, which would be indicators of modality here. Anything that I can notice with respect to theme? Well, use of the textual themes which would be related to what we've noticed already between parataxis and hypotaxis. But one of the interesting things that is when we take a look at theme, and one thing you probably want to be commenting on would be thematic progression. Notice it here, paragraph 3. The small business selected for this study is M2 International Group Limited, NCY Functional. 5B, NCY Functional. 6, NCY Functional. What do you call that? You call that thematic progression a kind of, well, to begin with, from 4, the small business is M2 International Group Limited, NCY Functional. Well, that is NCY Functional. That's sort of, the theme was the small business selected for this study. The new information, the focus was M2 International Group Limited, NCY Functional, which then becomes theme thereafter, right? What do you call that? Linear thematic progression. But then that becomes continuous thematic progression. 5B, NCY Functional. 6A, NCY Functional. You're talking about NCY Functional. You're describing it. And is that why then it's present tense because it exists and you're describing it, relational processes. I'll come back to paragraph 5. What was there about paragraph 5 and paragraph 6 leading into paragraph 7? What did we notice about it? More paratactic. The only parataxis occurs here. And past tense. Why? Well, we're going to stop there for a moment. We'll take a pause, and this will be our break. And I want you to sort of be thinking about, why do you think paragraph 5 and 6, why do they stand out? Why are they different from the nature of the rest of the text, okay? So while you think about that and go get something to drink, and I likewise, let's come back then. It's 5:02 now. Let's come back at 5 past the hour, okay? And if you have any questions, do so on the chat, okay? Okay. Can I ask a question? I noticed that when I go back and see the video of the Zoom session, whenever I have the chat on, it's blocked out on the screen that you see. So it's sort of, you see just one sort of dark gray box. Is that the case? So it sort of clutters up the screen, unfortunately. Too bad, we can't sort of leave it on. I'll remove it then. All right, the question. These were the questions that came up just now during the chat. Okay. Do we need 2 cameras on during the midterm and the final exam, or just 1 camera is okay? First thing, the midterm tests is different than the final exam. Now, for the final exam, the policy is quite strict and is given to us about having 2 cameras, all right? And that's something that you should pay attention to, whether you will be able to have that facility. If not, then you do need to inform the university, and according to their announcement, if I remember correctly, by the 10th of November, and for arranging, I guess, to do it on site. But for the final exam, it's a different thing, all right? Final exam, there they have a strict policy of 2 cameras. For the midterm, no. Midterm test is a bit less, what should I say, regulated, in the sense of it's not with 2 cameras, and it's not, definitely you should be careful that your work is cannot be drawn into question, and in fact it's a useful sort of way to make sure that people cannot claim that your work is not your own by having a second camera that shows that you actually did the work yourself. That protects you, all right? But is it required for the midterm test? No. Final exam, different story. Yes, it will be. How long are we given to complete the test next week? I'm giving you the full time, the 3 hours, all right? So you can just within those 3 hours, if you're finished, then you're finished, and then submit it. But you must submit before the end of that 3-hour session. How can we know which side is paratactic, hypotactic from the logical table? As I just explained, you have. Maybe I should probably show you back to illustrate that. All right. All right, I'll use this to illustrate it. All right, so taking a look here, you can see. Let me just get this, not this one. Here. You see here, elaboration. For some reason, it doesn't allow me to. Okay, pen. For here, you can notice that up until here, you have 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. All right. What does that indicate? It's parataxis. All right. It's parataxis involves a sequence of items that are arranged. They are basically equal grammatically, and therefore it's just a sequence, one and then the second one. But when it comes to this side, you'll notice that it is alpha, beta. What does the alpha, beta indicate? Alpha is the main clause. The beta is the dependent clause. So obviously, then this side is going to be hypotactic. This side is paratactic, and it'll be the same on the Excel table that you will see for your analysis that I've uploaded, and it is the same as you will see when I give you the test next week. All right. So I think I've answered these questions from chat. And if you have any other questions, feel free to let me know. All right. And the other thing that I noticed when I was looking at this was 5 and 6. I asked you to, what happened in here? In my interview with Miss Shaolina from the merchandising department, it goes on. This was basically sort of an account of what Miss Shao was telling the person in the interview. So it was sort of Ms. Shao's experience. So it was individual, it was from the interview. So that's why it was perhaps more paratactic. It was probably based on the interview that had been carried out. So it was her past experience, and it was probably taken from something that had been spoken, so reflected that fact. Interestingly, it comes through then, and we notice that in this particular sort of block of text here. It's different than the rest of the text, and the difference then we can explain. All right. All right, so that's sort of the kind of thing that I will be looking for. Can you make and draw out sort of insightful sort of, so it's not just having tables of so many process type, but finding not only patterns that show consistency, but looking perhaps, is there something to do with that consistency in terms of location, for example, as we've seen here. Mood and modality. We do notice that the greater involvement in decision-making should increase. This is sort of the probability. Can be severely damaged, possibility. Could boost the firm's performance. Hypothetically, it's possible. All right, so the point being, in academic discourse, we do find the use of modality to indicate sort of a kind of hedging that without it becoming so, making too strong a statement, which then can be sort of easily defeated and easily contradicted. There's a tendency to be sort of hedging, pulling back with some modality that qualifies what it is that one's saying. All right, so that's section A. Section A, you'll be given the analysis. Let me just go through again to mention, you'll be given a text. You'll be given some indication of the nature of that text, the situation in which it took place. And you will be given the tables, the theme, transitivity, logical analysis tables, and you will be asked to identify, just like we've done here, patterns that fit. So the obvious things that one would be saying from our example here, noticing the parataxis, not so much paratactic, heavily hypotactic. That would fit the idea of it being written. But where the parataxis occurs, coinciding with the use of past tense, there was a reason for that, and that was that part of the text was based on an interview and what had been identified from talking to someone that was from that particular a specific instance of an interview with a person from that particular business. And that would explain then the how that one block was particularly different than the rest. Why the relational? For example, we noticed another block of relational processes. There you were describing the nature of the company. So that description was likely to be in terms of relational processes. So there are points to be made, and the text that I will give you for the test, there definitely will be observations to make, there will be patterns, and there will be sort of findings that you should be able to observe and notice, all right? And that's what you should be. How does it, but an important point, what I will be really looking for is, and again, I can't stress it enough, when you begin to answer that question, begin it, as I've mentioned here, and I want to go back because I've mentioned this before on, just a minute. be sure to begin your answer with framing the text within the context of situation and telling me, given the nature of the context of situation, what expectations you begin with as you begin to take a look at this text. That's really what you, because you have an expectation what you will be looking for. You begin with sort of a hypothesis that you are trying to sort of observe whether that hypothesis is proven or not from the way you have, from the findings that you observe in the data. So begin your answer by framing the text within the context of situation. All right, so let me skip back down then to the second part of the test. And here will be sort of an essay question that you need to answer. And here I'm just, these are not the questions, all right? These are not the questions. These are just sort of give you an idea of what kinds of questions might be asked, all right? And I would be, this would be what it will look like. But again, I underscore, it's not the questions that you'll be asked, all right? All right, so answer one of the following questions. What are the strengths and weaknesses of rhetorical structure theory for the analysis of text? Give examples to illustrate your points. You see, you have in the, both for the midterm and for the final, you have access to all your PowerPoints. I'm not, because you do have access to it, I'm expecting you to draw on what you have learned from the kinds of analyses that we have done, what you've observed from the previous lectures and so forth. You can have materials, books available for you to reference and be referring to. This isn't from your memory. This is open book, open book. And so you have access to everything that I've presented and the PowerPoints, and you have access to all kinds of material that you can be referring to. And so when I say give examples to illustrate your points, what are the strengths and weaknesses of rhetorical structure theory? Well, if I was to explain this and I was to respond to this, I'd say that it allows us to go beyond simply the clause analysis that is allowed in systemic functional linguistics, systemic functional grammar. It goes beyond the clause to above the level of the clause to the takes into account the text as a whole. When we do so, however, it means that we then get out of the sort of realm of grammar and into semantics. Because the text is a semantic unit, unlike the clause, which is a lexicogrammatical unit, when we analyze the text, and when we draw on rhetorical structure theory, we notice that the definitions of the relations for rhetorical structure theory are semantically based. They are based on meaning. They're based on what does the, for example, when looking at concession, what does the writer favor? What is the point that the writer has positive regard for? Well, that is not a grammatical question. That's a semantic question. And whenever you get into semantics, you're getting into interpretation. And when you get into interpretation, it becomes subjective. That's why you have to recognize that rhetorical structure theory allows you to map out what is your theory of the text. All right, so I don't want to get into a whole discussion of rhetorical structure theory, but you see that's the nature of what you would be responding if this were the question. It won't be. There'll be a different question, all right? It won't be these questions, definitely. Well, what is the difference between cohesion and coherence as properties of a text? What's cohesiveness? Remember, I like to use the metaphor of texture. It is how closely tied the text is, the elements of a text to one another. What is cohesion? How would you define it? What is coherence? How would you define it? I've given you definitions of these concepts before. But what about a text contributes to its cohesiveness? We discussed the various aspects of what is cohesiveness: lexical cohesion, substitution, ellipsis, and so on. What's different then between that and coherence? What contributes to the coherence of the text? When we look at theme and the role that it plays in revealing the method of development of the text, highlighting through maybe continuous thematic progression a span of text that relates to another span of text, that's coherence. In other words, you're going to be asked these questions. You're going to have to respond and reply. But underscore the fact that you will be, it's an open book test. But you then also, let me make this very clear. You need to cite your sources. You need to cite your sources. You know what that means? It means that if you do use a book, you do use a quote, you quote it, or you paraphrase it, or you summarize it, but you mention the references. Now, believe me, if I see that your answer has a lot of references, I will be impressed, because then it's not just you talking off the top of your head or just relying on the lecture PowerPoints, but the sources. And the PowerPoints are a source too, okay? And in those PowerPoint slides, there are quotes, and there are some things that I've said in those PowerPoint slides. Should you cite it? Yes. If you quote it directly, sure, yes. That's what you do in academic discourse. You don't just take it as your own. You have to cite your sources. So I'm sure you should be asking the question then, how to cite my sources? I'm going to give you I've given you a PowerPoint, a set of slides related to using, and I would prefer you use the APA style. It's called the author date pattern for citing sources. It's what I use when I teach writing, academic writing, and it's what I would hope that you would be familiar with at this stage in your sort of university study. How to quote it, how to cite then the source, and how you indicate the year, and so forth. Now, I'm not going to take today, and these are sort of fundamentals which I sort of consider to be, you should already be aware of and already familiar with, all right? In case you are not so clear and not so sure how to cite your sources, there are two sort of PDF files. They're from PowerPoint slides that I use when I teach academic writing. And if you have, some of you have studied academic writing with me before, then you will have seen these slides before. But I put them here, and they are in week 7 review, under week 7 review, and how to cite your sources. It's based on a PowerPoint, so I've given you both the black and white and the color version. If you are unclear or unsure, then I would suggest you familiarize yourself with those slides. It won't take you long, and it might be worthwhile to go through it and to familiarize yourself with it so that you are able to do it properly. You see, this is a midterm test that is open book, that you have 3 hours to write on this one question in this part, all right? That means that you do have time to sort of, and not, I would hope not on the spot start looking up material, but have material handy, sort of know the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about, and preparing beforehand some source material that you then can refer to. But when you do so, if you quote it and you cite the source for it. And truly, I will be impressed if I see somebody who's actually done some sort of review of the literature, so to speak, and is familiar with what has been written and can refer to it. That is the sign of someone who's really been studying and researching and well preparing. All right. All right, so here is the list of topics that I want you to be familiar with in going through it. All right. Now let me see the time. We're about 1:30. And we're going to be going through these, and I will follow up with each of them in sort of as we go through it. First of all, language as a systemic resource. What have we said about language? Now, I'm reviewing slides here, all right? These are slides that are already there in your folders and available to you to go through, all right? Making meaningful choices. That's what language is about. What kinds of choices are we making? If we say that text is choice, we say that it is a selection within numerous sets of options. What are the sets of options? Can you think of any? What sets of options have we discussed? Transitivity. When I say that word, what does pops into your mind? Process, participant, circumstance. You have a choice of the process, how you are going to represent it, how you will represent what took place, your experience. Who is the initiator of the role? Who is the affected by the role? How do the circumstances play a role in what you're talking about? Well, those are choices. Choices about what you put first in the clause. What do we call that? Theme. Choices about how, when you expand your ideas one after the other, do you do so paratactically, extending and, or do you sort of, is there a progression, logical progression of your ideas in a sort of employing hypotaxis? We've looked at those as examples. And we've talked about these kinds of choices that you have. This is what we mean by sets of options. And these are the choices that will decide how your text means to your reader, your listener. But Halliday makes this point. He said that everything that is said presupposes a background what might have been said but was not. In other words, how I say something, there were other choices available. And so sometimes it isn't what I said, it's what I didn't say that matters. Why I didn't say it that way. And we saw that when we looked at the use of grammatical metaphor in Donald Chung's speech, right? Why didn't he say it reminds us? Why did he instead say it is a reminder? Well, there's a choice there. And where you have a choice, there is meaning. A text is a semantic structure that is formed out of a continuous process of choice among innumerable interrelated sets of semantic options. The total set of semantic options, the total availability for us is the meaning potential. So the semantic options, these are the meaning potential of language. What is our theory? Our theory is that when we make meaning, we are making choices. What choices? What is the nature of those choices? That is the theory. So we said it's not systematic functional linguistics, it is systemic functional linguistics. It is, what's the difference between systemic and systematic. Systemic means, it means that what is language? It isn't something necessarily systematic. That isn't our notion of grammar. Our notion of grammar is systems of choice. So when Halliday says thinking about meaning means thinking grammatically, he means thinking about the nature of those choices by which we make meaning. Sets of semantic options. And we said that this language is a systemic resource. It is a semiotic system characterized by a functional diversity. And when we talk about meaning, it's not just the ideas, it's how we relate, it's how we form the text. And that brings us to the second topic, metafunctions. This is the heart of what is the approach that we've taken to text linguistics, which of course comes from a systemic functional point of view. Systemic sets of options. Functional. What are the functions of language? These functions of language, what is the purpose to which language is put? Well, overall, in terms of the total picture of the purposes to which language is put, there are three fundamental metafunctions above all. And these are ideational, interpersonal, and textual. Looking at it in terms of how we construe experience, the ideational, how we enact relationships, the interpersonal, how we create the discourse, the textual. We call these the metafunctions of language. This is, what are the metafunctions? What is the metafunctional principle? It is that there are three basic functions to which language is put, the purpose to which language is put, and these are existing within language with a capital L. It is language, any language, has to have a way to reflect on the world, has to have a way to sort of join up our thoughts into some sort of logical expansion. It has to have a way to relate to people. It has to have a way to express our attitude and points of view. And it has to have a way to put all that then into a text. What is a text? What is a text? Text is any use of language. It is in me talking to you now. The text, in a way, is what you also see on the screen. That is a text. Halliday describes a language as being more than a semiotic system. It is also a system that makes meanings. It isn't just a semiotic system. It isn't just a system of choices that meaningful. It's the whole idea is that you can choose. Means that you can make meaning. There's a way to say it. There are countless other ways perhaps to say the same thing, and the way that you chose to say it, what motivated you to say it like that? Well, certainly is what you wanted to say, but it is also motivated by the situation within which you find yourself. And it is within that situation that you will make certain choices. In other words, it's not just up to anyhow you, it is also you in relation to the people that you're speaking to. So what enables this meaning-making potential? Grammar. What does that mean again? What is grammar? By now you should realize that when Halliday says thinking about meaning means thinking grammatically, he's not talking about subject-verb agreement. He's not talking about when you use the past tense as opposed to the present perfect and so forth. Yes, those are choices, but the point is, what is grammar? Grammar is the way meaning is realized, the wording. And so Halliday has formulated certain questions, and these are the questions then that we ask ourselves when we analyze a text and try to get a handle on what it means and how it made meaning. Questions like what kinds of processes take place, who initiates, who's affected, what are the circumstances? What do we call that? Transitivity. Are there dependent clauses? How are the clauses combined? Logical. What are the roles of the speaker and the hearer? Are you giving information or are you demanding information? What's the attitude of the speaker? Are you certain? Are you positive? Are you negative about it? What are your expectations that you're communicating to your listener? How is the message organized? What's the starting point? How do you indicate the focus of information? Okay, so let's take a look then at more detail in terms of taking a look at transitivity. Processes, participants, and circumstances. What are you looking for? If I ask you, what is the system of transitivity? This is what it is. The process types. Who is in the ER role? Who's in the ED role? You know that by now, right? What do we mean by that? Who's the initiator versus who is the affected? We've seen examples of how this is sort of, how patterns are formed in language relating to this nature of choice. We looked at it, we compared Donald Jung's speech with Susan Rice's. In Donald Jung's speech, A Tale of Two Systems, we noticed that who was the initiator? It wasn't people. But then that is exactly his, what would appear to be his ideology. And he says so, things are in the saddle, ride mankind, rather than we feeling we are the masters of our fate. No, we aren't. But then Susan Rice comes back and says, if you want change, you have to make it. If we want progress, we have to drive it. But they're both so different in their ideologies, but they're both so different in then the choices that they make in language. Susan Rice, mainly doing, and who's doing? People. I, you, we. We are the doers. We are the initiators. Not things, not abstract ideas, people. But that is exactly what they believe. That's how they construe the world. And remember, what you're talking about in transitivity is how you construe the world. Your ideology is in the way you speak. It's driving the choices that you make. It's evident from the choices that you make in terms of something so simple as process, participant, circumstance. Sounds so simple, but it tells you so much. Now, the process types. How does Halliday distinguish between the process types? If you say, well, he distinguishes them on the basis that material are doing, mental are sensing, verbal are saying, and so forth. Oh, then you have missed the story. You've missed the story. How does Halliday distinguish the process types? Remember, he asked some questions. Why these questions? What's the nature of these questions? The nature of these questions is to say that these process types are different in how they behave grammatically. What's that mean? They're different in terms of, for example, Who can be the initiator? In a doing process, it could be non-human, it can be human. You can ask the question, what did John do? You can say, what did John do to the ball? But you cannot project an idea from a material process. So what did John do? He kicked the ball. You can't say he kicked at the ball. No. But then you have mental processes that you can't ask those questions. You can't say, what did John do? He saw the bird. What did John do to the bird? He saw it. It has to be human or with a human consciousness, human-like. And a clock isn't. Clock thinks it's time to leave. No, you can't say that, but it can project. The three questions that Halliday is asking here all are designed to get at the way in which these processes behave differently grammatically. Grammatically, in terms of the wording, in terms of the choices of process, in terms of the participant. Verbal processes. We went through these. What did John do? He told a joke. Okay, what did John do to the joke? No. What we saw is that if you just even took these three questions, which are sort of like test cases, and tried to go through it, you can distinguish doing from sensing, from being, from saying. Thinking about meaning means thinking grammatically. How these processes behave differently in terms of what you can do with them and what you can't. That's what grammar is, right? What you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. Logical meaning. The interclausal logical semantic relations. Here we're talking about it at clause level. Are there dependent clauses? How are the clauses combined? Parataxis. 1 plus 2. Why? In what sense? Because you're talking about both are equal. It's one added, all right? They're equal. They're symmetrical, balanced. John enjoys reading. He likes swimming. Both, you could say. You could put a full stop right after the first one, but you decide to go on and extend it to add something else. But then you have hypotaxis. The alpha, this is my father, this is the statement. And then you add something in to elaborate on it. Who is teaching here? And we call this, to be specific, a non-restrictive, non-defining relative clause. It doesn't define which father, it just simply tells you more information about my father. Likewise here, this is my brother, comma, who is studying here. Likewise, a non-restrictive relative clause indicated by that comma. I need a comma here, especially because it's ambiguous, because I just as well could have said it like this. This is my brother who is studying here. And I have more than one brother. And I'm telling you which one. Then this restricts, this defines the brother. But in this sense, then, it's about the brother, and the extra clause here isn't just additional information. It's a post-modifier of that head noun, brother. Now, we saw, for example, in looking at Obama's debate performance, remember, we said that that first debate performance was considered to be pretty bad as far as Obama was concerned. One of the points' problem was that he didn't connect with his audience, but another point was the way he sort of expanded his ideas was rather unlike his usual way of speaking. This was just sloppy. It had so much embedding and everything, and then an embedded clause that I've tried to do, and everything. And then he starts another embedded clause, which will go on to the end there to invest in our future. In the meantime, that embedded clause includes several more layers of embedding. It just would be very difficult for anyone to process.
And so the question now is, how do we build on those strengths? And everything that I've tried to do, and everything that I'm now proposing for the next 4 years in terms of improving our education system, or developing American energy, or making sure that we're closing loopholes for companies that are shipping jobs overseas and focusing on small business companies that are creating jobs here in the United States, or closing our deficit in a responsible, balanced way that allows us to invest in our future. All those things are designed to make sure that the American people, their genius, their grit, their determination is channeled, and they have an opportunity to succeed. And everybody's getting a fair shot, and everybody's getting a fair share. Everybody's doing a fair share, and everybody's playing by the same rules.
See, what was striking about this was that this was a closing statement. It wasn't like on the spot Obama had to respond to Romney about something. This was part of his prepared final closing statement. He wasn't prepared. And it comes through in what sort of looks like a rambling kind of just talking off the top of his head, which was what he was doing. And the grammar shows that. It doesn't have any of the sort of careful patterning that his usually very complex sentences have. But all of this, so many clauses, all of them, so much embedding, all of that, then he comes up with all those things. Hypotaxis, parataxis. What difference does it make? We looked at it in respect of Trump's speech. We looked at it, as I mentioned before, in terms of Nixon and Obama, and Obama's second inaugural, and Nixon's farewell speech and so forth, which was heavily hypotactic, because again, he was using it spontaneously. That's something which you should pay attention to. What is the mode of discourse? Now, because it's spoken doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be highly paratactic. It was spoken because you're reading from a script. It's scripted to be read aloud like it's spoken. That's very different than spontaneous conversation. Now, what is parataxis? Hypotaxis. It tells you something about the nature of how the balance that exists between two ideas. But we can go on to look at the relationship of those ideas. Are they elaborating one on the other? There are three components of meaning. They are ideational, interpersonal, textual. It would be treated as one sentence, one complex clause, punctuated with a colon. They're two equal ideas, the one elaborating on the other. What are the three components of meaning? They are. But they're both equally could have been punctuated as standalone sentences. Not so in the non-defining relative clause. You can't say, this is my father, full stop, who is teaching here, full stop. No, who is teaching here, that requires something to have come before it. Hypotactic, it's dependent. You can extend ideas, just adding on ideas, not necessarily elaborating on them, but extending with giving an exception, showing an alternative, something new. I will leave soon, but you can stay. This is an alternative. He went home instead of going out with his friends. That's hypotactic. If you talk about time, for example, where, when, why, how, that's enhancing. We saw him off at the airport. Then we returned home. Now we can punctuate it here with a semicolon. We could punctuate it there with a full stop. Those two are paratactic. But if you say when John arrives, it can't stand alone. It's dependent. It's the beta clause, and the alpha clause follows. We will eat dinner. And finally, projecting. Direct speech, Tom said, quotation, I'll be away next week. Indirect speech, that clause, which obviously cannot stand by itself, hypotactic. Now, whether you're elaborating, extending, enhancing, projecting, you can do so paratactically or hypotactically. Why do you choose one or the other? Why choose hypotaxis? Hypotaxis gives the idea of a progression, a development of ideas. And when we're doing that in written language, written mode, or in reading aloud to sound like that it's spoken but scripted out, hypotaxis would be preferred. We can relate to it, we can focus on it. Paratactic it sounds spoken. Doesn't sound like it's so well developed, perhaps, the ideas. There's a judgment that we do make. Now, how this is represented in terms of sort of schematically, this is my friend who is studying here. That's hypotactic elaboration. Now, notice the equal sign. I know, 5A, that's projecting. 5B through C, that's the projecting is the double quotes. 5B and C, that's just like the previous example. If you can read this conditional, that's enhancement. You are too close. And the example that I just illustrated before, paratactic elaboration. So this is what you are doing in your analysis, and this is what we pay attention to. It's part of the patterning of language. And we looked at it, and I just want to remind you, and when we looked at the Brandon Leak example, his audition from America's Got Talent, when you do the logical, and this is, by the way, a point that I would make also related to your analysis for your presentations. I hope that you will, especially if it is sort of a complicated sentence like what we had here at 13, that you would map it out. Show the mapping of it to, rather than not just, and by the way, and I'll tell you this, when I put the logical into the Excel table, I very often have to do a schematic drawing first, just to get a picture of it. I have to visualize it. And so I visualize it here how the main clause A, all right, yet I'm still haunted by these memories. That's the main clause. And it is then expanded on through B, through J, through the rest, all right? 'Cause, all right, now what kind of, is that elaboration? Is that extension, enhancement, or projection? That's enhancement, because, cause and effect. And so I indicate that with an arc drawing from B through J. That's sort of, this is the beta, all right? Because I have a really creative mind, 13. And sometimes it designs these alternate realities, including an embedding, where she is still here, still alive. 13E, and all these things I wish we could have done are played again and again. And what did we say about this? We said that the and gives it that spoken feel, like he's really talking to you. when we looked at the mapping out then of the whole text, and this is what those of you who are on the team doing the rhetorical analysis, this is what you would produce, all right? Your rhetorical analysis would be to show something of these relations that exist between combinations of clauses, and from the clause right up to the text as a whole. Just to remind you, when you're looking at the rhetorical structure and looking at it, and, for example, well, that had that relation. Now, this is another important point. I made it before, and I don't know if you remember. You might say, well, how come between 1 through 3 and 4 it's not paratactic? Well, I don't take, when we're talking, and does not necessarily just mean two paratactic ideas. One of the things you notice, you must learn. The nature of 1 through 3 was all relational. I have, I'm, love is. That's all what is, what it is describing. And you. What's the and mean here? What would you say was the idea that's being expressed here? It just doesn't, it is related to what follows. The main idea is you must learn. Must. Notice the modality, the emphasis. You must learn to hold on to it loosely so when it leaves, it won't exit so painfully. The relationship may be said by and, but and we, in spoken especially, it can mean a lot of different things.
I have two facts for you. One, I'm 6 feet tall. And two, love is the most vulnerable thing one will ever have. And you must learn to hold on to it loosely, so when it leaves, it won't exit so painfully.
He concludes after his 1, 2, the third is not just a third idea. It is all preceding, preparing you for what follows in 4. Carries on, July 14th, the theme, you remember, illustrated the sort of the introduction to what follows from 5 onwards. From 5 onwards, it's the story that he's telling.
On July 14th, 1996, an angel was brought to this earth. Her name, Danielle Marie Gibson, but I only know her as Puff. Her smile is as wide as the universe. Her eyes, they glimmer like the stars. She is my world and my sister.
5, he introduces, and 6 through 8 then very clearly is describing her smile, her eyes, she. Notice the consistent thematic progression here, continuous. Her smile, her eyes, she. All related to her. And each of them 3 different points that is being made about his sister that was raised in 5.
I, just 4 years old at the time, learned what it meant to love selflessly, for on days in which my strength was but knee-high, seeing her smiling face would make my soul fly, but,
you notice that but at the end? What's he signaling? All of this that's been said, and but. The but here is not just an indicator between clause 11 and 10. It is a but that indicates the separation of what's preceded. 5 through 8, 5 through 10. That whole block is distinguished from what will happen now. But March 23rd, 1997. Carries on, 12 and 13, 11, 12, 13.
on March 23rd, 1997, I've been ground-bound because she left Earth to go back home amongst the stars, right next to God, but I was left here to manufacture wings out of tears and broken dreams, yet I'm still haunted by these nightmares, because I have a really creative mind, and sometimes it designs these alternate realities where she is still here, still alive, and all the things I wish we could have done are played again and again and again, and I'm tired of playing God because I gotta come to terms with the fact that my sister ain't never coming back.
And then he concludes with 14 and 15.
And that's the cost of love. Caring for someone so much that you can't imagine living life without them. Staring at a grave like, how about I trade my 6 feet for yours, but that's not real. And I know I said earlier to hold on to love loosely, so when it leaves, it won't exit so painfully. But if this pain and these memories are all that I got left of you, I won't never regret these scars from just trying to hold on to you.
You see why I'm struck by his performance and why I believe other people responded the way they did was one of the things that, as we notice it, and that's why I mentioned before the poem Alfred Lord Tennyson, employing those features that are typical of spoken, spontaneous discourse into something that is crafted to give that impression. That means then that we know what to expect in terms of spontaneous spoken. We know the difference. In linguistics and in text linguistics, what we've been doing is we've been turning that inference that we have, that we can tell the difference, but we don't know linguistically what's going on. How grammatically is it realized? Grammatically, it's realized by the use of conjunctions. It's realized by the use of parataxis. These are the various factors that enter into what then we can analyze and find. But I'm saying that when someone like Brandon Leake performs, when someone like Alfred Lord Tennyson writes, they're employing this knowledge too. And they're using it as part of their craft to create a response. Well, it's a bit past 2. Let's pause there, and let's have a break. And if there's any questions or anything, please let me know via the chat. Okay, let's pause for a moment. Okay, some very good points made in chat, and I noticed that a number of you chat privately. In other words, you raise the questions to me. That's fine, and I try to observe that. And if you chat to me privately, in other words, not to everybody, then I try to be sure to reply to you in the same way. But there were some very good points that were raised, and I appreciated one in particular, which was, and I just because I would like to make, I think it's a point worth making. By the way, two things that did come up with chat. One was related to your test. Someone asked, well, then both parts A and B are essay-like? Yes, they are. All right. I mean, in a sense that different nature. The one is more making observations based on the analysis. The part B is more the theoretical, the conceptual. So that's the difference. But in format, they're both pretty much going to be essay-like. Yes. Let's see, the other question. I don't recall right now what the other question was. Let's see. Just a moment. Let me see. I want to. Okay, let me just see. There are a few things on chat, and so let me reply to those, because there probably would be other things that people would be concerned about. The other question was, do we need to provide examples? Yes, provide examples from our notes. Yes, can be from your notes, can be from other sources as well. All right, so I mean, you, in preparation for the midterm test, you can be looking up some other resources on the topics such as we are discussing, and which I'm mentioning, the list of topical areas. But yes, definitely from the lectures. But should you cite the lectures when you give examples? Yes. Just follow normal academic procedure and protocol when you are copying or quoting. Give reference to those whom you copy from and so forth. All right. Let's see. Someone asked if we are wondering if the one who produces the text will that affect, will their background affect the grammar and affect their representation? Of course, we are what we have experienced and what we have heard. Our background is very much determining the kinds of choices that we're making. Okay, I would like to ask for part A, the tables are given. We further analyze it on the patterns such as the percentage of each category. Yes, like I illustrated with the examples earlier, you will have the tables. You are to look for the patterns. And in the patterns, that means looking for consistency in usages, perhaps across the text or in parts of the text. And as we illustrated today, in that one part of the text where it did sort of was a bit different in terms of choice of tense and parataxis, more parataxis, there was a reason for that. We could explain that. So you would discuss those kinds of patterns and the effect that it has. Will there ever be an objective analysis? There is an objective analysis in terms of what you will see, the data that you will see, the kinds of patterns, certainly that, I mean, you can quantify it. In that sense, it's objective. And how much parataxis there is as opposed to hypotaxis. That's objective. It's based on the data that you see in the tables. Interpretation, will it affect? Well, if it's the grammar and you're talking about specifics like process, participant, circumstance, or what's theme, or the use of mood or modality, those are fixed grammatical sort of concepts. And there will be, in some cases, there can be some, what should I say, fuzziness, in the sense that, for example, what kind of the process. You remember in that Brandon Leak example, I said haunted. Now, haunted, one could say, is a material process. Something goes to haunted the house. You could say, but in this case, he was saying he was haunted. I took it to be mental. There we could argue perhaps the point, but the likelihood of much argument in the analysis, you have your data. Now, you could certainly tell me that in the analysis that you see in the tables, you might disagree with something, and you can tell me that you disagree with that. But for the most part, what I'm giving you are the data, and on the basis of the data, you make observations. When you do your analysis of the abstracts, for example, you will have sort of more objective grammatical data in terms of transitivity, logical, the categories I've mentioned. And on the basis of that, you will be able to observe some patterns. You'll be able to observe some usages. Now, those will be useful to you when you then also look at and start to evaluate it. When you evaluate it, and when you, for example, look at the logical structure of a text as a whole, I made the point earlier that when you're looking at the text as a whole, like the rhetorical structure, then you're going to get into some differences, perhaps, of interpretation. Yes. So, for example, how I've drawn the lines and how I've visualized the pattern. Let me illustrate this with a certain point. Yeah, good suggestion. What if I can capture the screen of all the questions the students asked? I did that before in a previous course, and I could try to do that, but I avoid doing that now because I have always, and even when I've done it in previous courses, I've avoided anything that is private, anything sent private questions. What I can do is I can go through and capture the questions, but I will only do that for questions put to everyone, okay? So I will, so if you have a question, if you feel that it's, you're happy for everyone to see it, then please do put it, everyone, don't put it just to me. Okay, will there ever be an objective analysis? I believe I've answered that question. Not sure to comment on the cohesiveness, coherence. I don't quite capture this question. I'm not really sure about how to comment on the cohesiveness and coherence. Like the majority of them are a certain type of verb. Okay, I think I understand what you're saying. You're asking about, for example, when we look at, for example, the let me go back to all right. Okay, when we look at, for example, in this analysis here, what's cohesive about it? Well, the cohesiveness is when I notice, for example, the use of the repetition of the relational processes in paragraphs 2 through 5, beginning of paragraph 5. That those use of relational processes forms a certain cohesiveness, a pattern. Well, that gives it a certain continuity as well for that, and identifies a block, right? Likewise, in terms of the choice of tense, as I noticed before, in terms of from around paragraph 5 up through beginning of paragraph 7, the shift to past tense and continuously, for the most part, past tense. That also is a sign of cohesiveness. Cohesiveness occurs when you have something very often repeated, gives it a sense of continuity, connection. They form sort of blocks within the text, right? And notice on the screen as well, when looking at the logical paragraph 5 up through beginning of paragraph 7, that's only there where the parataxis occurs. Again, you see that block. So that block, 5 through beginning of paragraph 7, it exhibits patterning, the level logical, tense, largely material processes. Okay, so that block itself has a certain cohesiveness. It has a certain texture defined by the repetition of certain choices, whether it's logical, whether it's tense, or so forth. Now, that block, how does that block, that's cohesiveness. How does that block then relate to the other blocks that hierarchically make up the text as a whole? That's where you get into coherence. How do the various parts of a text relate one to the other? That is coherence. So when we start to sort of draw our illustration of, and here, let me go down a few slides. All right, now here is a good example of that I want to illustrate a few points in terms of looking at the how I mapped out 1 through 3 and 4. Now, one of your classmates suggested, well, couldn't it be 3 and 4 are together? Now, I drew it this way. Now, here, the discussion is becoming how I interpret it. And this is sort of my theory. Remember when we said that when you do the level of the text as a whole, the coherence of the text, visualize, for example, with rhetorical structure theory, you're getting into interpretation. You're getting into semantics. That's different than what is occurring at clause level. Why does Halliday insist on clause level analysis? Because what he's saying is the grammar takes place at the level of the clause. There, your discussion is grammatically based. It is more objectively based. When I'm looking at cohesiveness, I'm looking at the patterns. I'm looking at something that can be quantified. That's more objective. When I get to the level, though, of discussing how these sort of like 1 through 3 is related to 4, I'm getting into interpretation. I'm getting into semantics. I'm getting beyond the grammar. It becomes a theory. It becomes a hypothesis. And so my hypothesis is represented here by 1 through 3 and then 4. But as I was beginning to say, rhetorical structure theory seems subjective. Yes, couldn't 3 and 4 maybe belong together? Couldn't that be redrawn in some way? Yes. But you would have then to be able to explain why you interpreted it the way you did. Responding to the student, I said, well, I looked at 1 through 3 and I noticed that they were all relational processes. I have, I'm, love is. So they were all the verb to be. And I saw that as sort of having a texture. It sort of was a relational, all relational. And it was 1 and 2. So very clearly, 1, 2, and 3 were sort of paratactic. You were indicating 1, 2, very clearly paratactic. Now, 4, and you shift it now, and the shifting of attention is completely to you. It's addressed to you, no longer about something else, not about I, not about love. It is directed at you. That's why I took 4 itself to be the main idea. In other words, I have to have some explanation. I have to have some grammatical basis. Yes, some explanation involves some grammatical basis to explain why, in this case, I've drawn it the way I have. Is it the only way to draw it? No. Could someone infer a different way of meaning? Yes. And they could argue, make their argument. Here we argue, but this here is about the coherence. So the 2 questions that I'm trying to address is, one is, what's the difference between cohesiveness and coherence? Cohesiveness, I see, as something which is really able to be quantified. It's able to be very grammatically, more objectively illustrated. When it comes to coherence, certainly there are grammatical aspects that give us signals and clues. And those clues are the basis for our hypotheses, which we can make an argument for and hopefully give evidence for. I hope my discussion here has been helped it to make somewhat clear. Welcome further questions about it and so forth. And again, I would just encourage you, if you do have questions, if it's all right with you, please put them out there to everyone, all right? And so I will try to, as was suggested, capture the screen. Unfortunately, I wish very much that Zoom allowed us to save the chat, but we aren't allowed. That feature isn't allowed, so if I have to go back and capture the various chat, but I will try to remove those questions that were addressed to me privately. I do have a feeling, though, that many of the questions that you put to me privately, it's not really a private concern. It's really a matter which is a question which, you know, others would maybe be asking as well. All right, so, all right, let's move on. Where are we? Theme, right? I do have to be sure to get through all the review part. Okay, theme, thematic progression. Okay, let's see. All right. I don't know why last class, the last hour was not recorded. I don't know what happened. I must have pressed something wrong. I'm just making sure that it still seems to be recording. Theme, thematic progression. Textual, related to textual meaning. How is the message organized? All right, theme, the initial grammatical element. Can be the grammatical subject. It could be a prepositional phrase expressing the circumstance. It could be even a verb. All right, close the door. The focus, we said, is where the intonation in English, for example, and this is based on English, other languages would have different ways to show this. We show the focus through a kind of tonic prominence, through the intonation. So theme, we also made a point that it involves the first experiential element. First experiential element, what is an experiential element? A process, a participant, circumstance. And we said, though, that not necessarily is it theme can include the experiential, but it also can include the textual and the interpersonal. So what is theme? Theme is whatever occurs before the first experiential element and the first experiential element itself. You got that? When you look for theme, what you look for theme first is the first experiential element. Here it's I do love your cooking. But before that, what comes before the first experiential element? But, which is textual, relating it to what was said. Mary, interpersonal, it's evocative, it's addressed to Mary. Different kinds of special thematic structures with a special kind of meaning. Is John I want, indicating that John, even though it's at the beginning, it's the focus. Identification gives a sense of it's exclusively this and this alone. What I need is a new car. Why not just say I need a new car? It has a meaning. Thematic progression. So in the sense that, for example, we noticed in this journal article, from the first sentence, 2 clauses, the focus of each of those 2 clauses becomes combined into the theme of the second sentence. Extending their ranges toward the poles, the focus of 1A, earlier in the spring than previously, the focus of 1B, and these 2 are combined now in the theme which follows at the beginning of the second sentence. These range expansions. and changes in the timing of seasonal events. Thematic progression. But it can also be continuous, like we noticed from this dictionary description of two dictionaries and comparing and contrasting. Language of science. What is the language of science? We said that science reveals new ways of organizing the grammar, that it introduced new ways of communicating. Part of what we already have seen in terms of turning, for example, the ideas into verbs, into nouns, this is part of what we're talking about. But what is being said here is that when science needed new ways of speaking, what it drew on was what there existed in the language, pre-existing resources. In terms of the Greeks introduced this idea of, going back to what the Greeks did with their language. There was sort of a transcategorizing potential. In other words, being able to turn verbs and adjectives into nouns. That goes back to the early Greeks. Adding these extending a nominal group with an embedded clause, a prepositional phrase. That goes back again to the early Greeks. So taking pre-existing resources that there were in the language and then including them in the language, so that when Sir Isaac Newton talked about optics, when he wrote Optics, there were descriptions of experiments, and when he describes an experiment, it's all with verbs. And it was step by step what he did. But then when he starts to make arguments and conclusions from these, begins to include nominalizations, repackaging what was verbs, those happenings, into something. And finally, when it was finally sort of formulated in a sort of almost mathematical manner, it ended up with very simple clauses. Simple sentences, one clause only. A equals X. A is X. And A and X would be very lexically dense nominal groups. By the end of the 18th century, this practice nominalizing the experiential context, turning verbs and adjectives into nouns, using the verbal group to signal a logical relationship between happenings. Instead of using a conjunction, you use a verb. A causes X. A proves X. And A and X are very extensive nominal groups. This has emerged, says Halliday, as the most highly valued model for scientific writing. And we see it here in this example from Robin Fawcett. They educated girls, it's a clause, followed by a conjunction, and then followed by another clause, women acquired the vote. You're expressing it as these happenings, verbs. But then you turn those verbs into nouns, the education of girls and the acquisition of the vote by women. And how do you connect up these two nouns? With a verb. And the verb expresses what? It expresses a relationship. It expresses what would otherwise have been expressed as a conjunction. And we said that what's happened then is you see a shift. Verbs and adjectives are becoming nouns. Conjunctions are becoming verbs. And instead of several clauses, they educated girls and then women acquired the vote, you have these clauses become groups or noun phrases, nominalizations. Basically a simple clause. But then, as we said in the language of science, this has become so frequent. This has become so much the habit that it has become the way these shifts have become the drift. It has become the way we speak. It has become the system of language. And Professor David Butt puts it this way: the analyses of scientific discourse reveal a broad form of grammatical drift, a novel intensity in the way writers in English can construe their experience, a new novel intensity, turning everything into nouns. That's the intensity, that's the repetition. And it's a new thing. We can see it in the English language with people like Sir Isaac Newton, like Charles Darwin. And what this has meant then is that there's just been a steady drift towards things. Things have been foregrounded at the expense of qualities, processes, and relations. Well, this brings us to the point of grammatical metaphor. The idea that there is sort of a congruent, to begin with, when we begin speaking as a child, the mother tongue way of speaking is what we might call the congruent way of speaking. The normal, it's the default. Things are nouns. Qualities are adjectives. Processes are verbs, and so on. But then in language, and then this is the critical aspect of it, we can do things in language that take, for example, this happening, we can move in. We gave the example here that solvent tends to be drawn through. It describes a moving, a happening, and then turn it into a something. We can redraw the lines. We call that grammatical metaphor. It's metaphorical. Grammatical metaphor becomes a means to innovate in language the level of structure, just like what you have with traditional lexical metaphors. But here it's with the grammar itself, turning verbs into nouns. It's grammatical, it's a grammatical act. And why? It serves a purpose, it serves a function. This whole way of turning verbs into nouns, turning something that is dynamic into something that is static, gave scientists power over their environment. It made the world stand still so you can describe it, explain it, measure it, or as Halliday says, even create new virtual realities. I talked about metaphorization. I compared Russell Mears' approach to what is a metaphor. What is a metaphor? Mears describes it. You remember Mears is this emeritus professor of psychiatry at the University of Sydney. He comes at it from the view of a psychiatrist, and he's talking about metaphor as expressing something which we otherwise could not say. It describes a reality which hard to put into words. And so we find a way to picture it, turn it into a symbol. And he talks about 3 stages, taking something which is a replica, something which then resembles something. And what's the pattern? What's the direction here? Comparing like with like. Like with like so much that it's an exact copy. Like with like so much that it resembles it. Then you get to metaphor, and it's comparing like with unlike. But by doing so, forming a picture. It represents what would otherwise have been presented in a different way. Finding similarities in dissimilars. So this pattern matching leading from a comparison of like with like to like with unlike, paradoxically perceiving similarities in dissimilars. Halliday, on the other hand, also talks about metaphorization. 3 stages. He talks about it, he's saying that we can be sort of represented by 3 histories. Developmental, evolutionary, individuating. But what he's saying is that when you look at language, there's the development of the individual, how the individual develops language. You and me, individually, how did we develop language? But then on the other hand, you also can talk about the language itself sort of evolving, developing. And finally, though, you can even talk about it from the standpoint of a particular text. A text unfolds from the beginning to the end. There's three histories here. And out of those three histories, he looked at it from the standpoint of how we, each of us, develop the ability to make metaphor. And he noticed the ages at which metaphorization occurs, not until age 9 to 13 years. And it following a progression which begins with sort of generalization, going from a proper noun, mommy, daddy, to a common noun, parent, even further, family members, being able to understand classes and even class of classes, taxonomies, being able to go into abstractness, being able to take something which is big, small, talk about size, short or tall, and talk about height. But finally, it was for him also metaphor. This idea of move is movement, a verb into a noun, remind into reminder, and the idea of reconstruing experience into a different way, instead of talking about it in terms of generalization, abstractness, metaphor. What was sort of paradoxical about it was that in the direction that we are moving, this to me, it was quite surprising when I thought about it, because I hadn't thought about it in these terms. And that was that while we become more and more abstract in our way of thinking, moving in that direction, in the end, we take sort of a non-linear, we take a step aside, because what we've done is, what we've actually been able to do is turn the abstract into the more concrete. We're almost to the end of the hour. I thought I'd end on this. I had been thinking to go through some more, and I will leave those slides for you to look at, and which mainly goes on to the verbal art. And in fact, since I didn't get to it in the review, I won't put it on the test, okay? So I won't put the verbal art on. Language of science, which we've just been talking about, grammatical metaphor, yes. And the rest, in terms of talking about verbal art, I won't give you a question on that. All right, we'll save that for another time. What is a paradox? A paradox is when you take a statement that is almost contradictory. It's opposed to common sense. Well, that's sort of what we're talking about in terms of the metaphorical, sort of the paradoxical. It's sort of contradictory, that the more abstract you become, the more concrete you are. We're comparing like with like, and then you compare like with unlike. In a way, it's like an oxymoron. You know what an oxymoron is? When you take two words that are quite contradictory, like cruel kindness, or like that song, Sound of Silence. And that's how I'll end on this note. Okay, that's we'll have time for today. So the test will only cover up to what I've covered here, and that is language as a systemic resource up to metaphorization, comparing Mears and Halliday. I did not get to Hassan's notion of symbolic articulation and foregrounding, so that will not be on the test, all right, in part B of the test. All right, so that's I think all for today, and if you have questions, do let me know, all right, and we'll call it quits after this. Do let me know if you have any questions. Content of the midterm will be up to last week's lecture. No, it will be up to what I've discussed here today, all right? So if it was, and I've just made that point, maybe the question came in before I did. The content leading as what we've just been covering up to, but not including Hassan's notion of symbolic articulation and foregrounding. Okay, guys, that's it from me. We'll stop there. Thank you.